Hello and welcome to today's video. In today's video I'm going to be talking about reasonable expectations. So I'm mainly going to focus on reasonable expectations for people you know, friends, family, business acquaintances. I want to discuss this topic because knowing what a reasonable expectation is can be quite difficult, and if you don't know what is a reasonable expectation for you to put on somebody, it becomes very difficult for you to have a relationship with that person, or at the very least your relationship with that person is likely to encounter difficulties because you either over or under expect of them. Firstly, I'd quite like to define why a reasonable expectation is so important using some personal experiences. When I moved schools for sixth form, none of my friends wanted anything to do with me, and the main reason was laziness, and at the time that really annoyed me. But now, being in my early 20s, being at university, I've realised that I don't think I was being reasonable in expecting my friends to socialise with me still, because it's out of sight, out of mind when you're at that age. And when you've got school friends, you don't depend on each other as much as you do when you're an adult. I would generally say you're welcome to disagree with this, and if you do disagree with it, please leave a comment and explain why. I generally think the building block for a good, strong, long-lasting relationship is some kind of interdependence. So if you don't need your friends, it becomes very hard to make friends. And I think this is something of the modern era, because you don't really need friends in the modern era in terms of physical and transactional need. So if you do have friends, it's a luxury that you don't necessarily need. And in some cases, having friends can be difficult because they expect things of you and you expect things of them. So the main materialistic drive for friends isn't there anymore. So I think a lot of people don't have friends anymore because having friends is too much effort, and now you don't necessarily need to put that effort in, because if you need something or need money, you can usually get it off the state or someone else. Now I'd like to turn to what is a reasonable expectation and what is not a reasonable expectation. Generally, I would say that a reasonable expectation is something that you can expect someone to do because you'd either do it for them or it won't inconvenience them to a dramatic degree. I think it's important to have some kind of definition, because if you don't really know what a reasonable expectation is, it becomes very difficult for you to have them. What I'd like to also say is you should also have reasonable expectations of yourself, and your reasonable expectations of yourself should come into how you portray yourself. Someone I used to watch on YouTube, Gavin McInnes, says this a lot. He's very open that he wouldn't be willing to go to prison for any of his mates, and so on and so forth. And I think that kind of honesty is very helpful for your friends, because let's be honest, most people would not be willing to go to prison for their friends because they have jobs, careers, and other things that would impede. What I've noticed when I've been reading books on organised crime and so on is if someone is going to be a fall guy and go to prison for someone, normally there has to be some kind of remuneration. So I'd like to roll with that idea a bit and get on to the idea that reasonable expectations change depending on what you're willing to do for somebody. So if you've got a friend and they're broke, it's quite an unreasonable expectation for them to not take money when offered to badmouth you in public if you're a public figure, especially if they're in financial difficulty. I'm not saying you should settle all your friends' financial problems. That would probably be a bad thing, but lots of rich people, especially rich people who didn't inherit it, normally fall out with or leave their friends. And I think that's, or at least their friends of childhood. And I think the reason for that is, if you're significantly wealthy, it's a very unreasonable expectation to expect your broke friend not to get jealous and start causing you problems because you have lots of money and they don't. I've also seen this when rich people have cleaners that they pay £10 an hour and their cleaners are around 10, 20, £100,000 worth of jewellery. So this is something that is more of a new money thing, but it's also something that the aristocracy used to understand. If your cleaner or staff are struggling to survive and are broke, you can't reasonably expect them not to steal from you. Whereas if they're well remunerated for their labour, it is a reasonable expectation for you to expect your staff not to steal from you. I know that's quite an extreme example, but I think it's helpful to sort of explore what a reasonable expectation is. Reasonable expectations are quite hard for people to have, and there are lots of reasons for that. I think the main reason is most people don't like the idea that someone, especially someone they see as a friend, would not go to the wall for them or could be convinced into betraying you. And I understand that, because if you adopt the mindset that everybody, if you gave them enough motivation, would betray you, that's probably quite an unhealthy thing to have. I mean, I've learnt that the hard way, because some of my friends have repeated things that I've said when I've specifically told them not to, and it becomes a regular thing. And I'm not saying that I would encourage people to look at everybody as someone who would betray them if given the right motivation. But I think it can be helpful to look at people when you're in a relationship with them, and whether that's a romantic relationship or a friendship or a business relationship, what would make this person end the relationship with me? What would make this person betray me and inconvenience me? And I think that's a very helpful thing to do, because if you're going into business with someone, normally it's a better deal than you're giving them. So, and that's healthy, especially if you're running a business, because then you're aware of what will and will not make someone betray you. Sorry about that, my flatmate's interrupted with a letter. In terms of personal relationships, it's a lot harder to know what a reasonable expectation is. For example, most people, when they're dating, are so, not necessarily infatuated, but so starry-eyed about their partner that they won't consider circumstances to which the person you're dating or married to would either make you want to leave them or leave you. And though I don't think it would be healthy to constantly think about that, I think it would be helpful for most people to at least think about it and maybe even discuss it, because if your expectations that you have of your partner are reasonable and clear, in the long term I think your bond would probably be safer. And when it gets to personal relationships such as friendships, it's quite difficult, because I've noticed this with friends. A lot of friends I've had and still have are very easy to get to badmouth you. And I think that shows a lot about someone's character. Because if someone is the type of person who will badmouth you, it's quite a clear sign that someone is very easy to jump ship, as you will. And I think if someone constantly badmouths you when you're not there, they're not your friend, but they can be fun to be around. For example, I had a friend when I was in high school who was very bad for badmouthing people, especially me. And I still liked the guy, he was still fun to hang out with, but it's something, knowing something about a person affects what is and is not a reasonable expectation. So going back to the person who I disliked, or the friend I hang out with that badmouthed me in public, there's no problem really with you hanging out with that person as long as you have reasonable expectations. You don't tell that person any private information, or that person doesn't get too close to you. To wrap up, what I've come to the conclusion is there's no reason why you cannot have untrustworthy people in your life. You just need to reasonably be able to know that they're untrustworthy and give them reasonable expectations based on their untrustworthiness. Thank you very much for watching. Please check my links below. There's my Substack, which is where I write articles on legal and political strategy, and also there is my Open Oratory Locals page, which is a page where I teach practical public speaking advice.